Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I'm glad on this episode to be talking with comics creator Amit Tishler. Amit, thank you for jumping in, and thank you for looking so cool. You look much cooler than me. I don't know.
You're welcome, I
Yes,
guess. Thank
yes,
you.
yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
No, and yeah,
you know.
yeah. and Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. This is kind of it's a crazy time for me. Slightly
Exciting
overwhelming.
things.
Yeah, a lot of exciting things happening and more on the way, but I'll let you lead the charge. So let's get into
Absolutely.
it.
And feel free to talk about what you can talk about, and then if you talk about things that you can't talk about yet, just let me know, and I'll do this magic little thing that I do where I set the drop date for like some future time when such things can be talked about.
Roger that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We aim to be friendly in that way. So I like to start with the origin questions of like, how did you find comics? Why comics? What is it about comics that's attracted you as a reader and creator?
Yeah. So do you want me to also talk a little bit about like my own background? I feel like that
Yeah.
would be a good entryway to that, starting from
Hmm.
where I am today and then leading up to how I got through comics to that.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so, so okay, I'll do that really quickly, just to kind of contextualize everything that I'm about to say. So I'm originally from Tel Aviv, Israel, and I started my career as a 2D animator on both animated TV shows and software products like interactive educational simulations, games, etc. And nowadays, I'm a creative director at an LA-based media agency called Pure Imagination Studios. So that's my job by day to develop
Hmm.
immersive branded entertainment experiences for their film studio clientele. And I'm an independent writer by night for comic books, IP development for TV, games, and more. So that's more or less where I am today. Now, history as a comic reader. So my general path into working in entertainment, it actually started from being a comic reader, but it was kind of an odd journey. So I grew up in Israel in the 80s, and I could really only start reading in English in the 90s because my first language is Hebrew. Um,
Hmm.
at the time, comics was not a popular medium over there. I mean, even
Yeah.
now, it's still very niche in that part of the world. But when I was growing up, finding any comics required some tenacity. Like this was
Hmm.
work.
Hmm.
I started by reading local content. So, because that was the easiest to access as well. So, there are a few iconic comic creators over there, and I was a big fan of one of them, Uri Fink, who's still active to this day. And that was also my gateway drug into superhero comics. So, as a
Nice.
teen, in
Nice.
the 90s, like many other 90s kids, I became quite the Marvel fan. And I had to sometimes just take like a 30 to 40-minute bus ride just to get to a few stores that sold some comic books because it wasn't common. So, like
Hmm.
any Spider-Man or X-Men comics that I could scavenge were just a triumph. It was kind of like finding a treasure on an epic weekend adventure. Um, didn't help that buses were kind of exploding in terrorist attacks in Tel Aviv around that time. But hey, Age of Apocalypse was going on, and I needed to get my hands on that. So
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
small sacrifice. But like aside from local comics and American superhero comics, I was also really into Asterix, which makes sense given the fact that I became quite a history buff, and that affected a lot of my work.
Hmm.
Um, so the internet itself really changed everything. It kind of helped with gaining access to media in general. And eventually I moved to the States and started working in entertainment. So, like just access became a lot easier. Nowadays, I'm focused on honestly consuming stuff that just inspires me and my
Yeah,
sensibilities.
yeah.
That stuff that makes me feel positively jealous. But when I say positively jealous, I mean like when you watch or play or read something and you go, damn it, like that's good. I want to do that. I want to be
Yes.
able to trigger that feeling. Um,
Hmm.
so my current like two favorites are actually from the same creator, and my wife brought them to my attention, both from James Tinian. So, and this is a huge recommendation: The Nice House on the Lake by DC Comics and Something's Killing the Children. If you haven't read it yet, by Boom Studios, sci-fi horror, cinematic, stylish, well-paced, a lot of character depth and subtlety. Like it's really what draws me as a reader nowadays.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. Both of those are so atmospheric. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna drop in a couple of, or at least the major title. We could talk Tales of Lila, which is one of those that's out there and discoverable of yours, but gonna talk Edenfrost
Yeah.
and just the atmospheric nature of Edenfrost being something that is sci-fi fantasy, world building inspired. I can totally see like those threads between what draws you as a reader and what draws you as a writer as well.
Absolutely. And and that evolved a lot. Like oddly, like Tales of Lyle was just kind of an experiment in self-publishing that I did early on because I wanted to dip my toes. It's actually how I met Mark Irwin from Mad Cave because I was looking for advice back in the day
Hmm.
on just how to get into. Even though I started from comics, most of my experience was in game and TV production. So sure, you're into storyboards, but comics is its own medium and it has its own sensibilities and it has its own process. And I just wanted feedback. And this was kind of an early dip, just an experiment of like how to craft something together, which
Hmm.
taught me everything that I needed to know moving forward years from then to doing what I do now, which is doing it more professionally as a side gig, right? So that's kind of
Yeah.
where all of that came from. And my own taste also evolved and adjusted as the media landscape was changing and as my own, as I was aging and I saw the media landscape kind of shift around me. I was always a really big, especially in the last decade or so, like a big anime fan.
Hmm.
And I'm a consumer of both anime and manga and Japanese video games, and that was always something that I kind of advocated for. That is now gladly a lot more mainstream, and I think that a lot of my work also has it shows it's never manga, but it definitely shows that influence when it comes to tone, when it comes to meshing things together, when it comes to how I write characters or how I direct tensions. Like I really kind of wear my in the same way that you're looking at me right now. This is me always. I kind of wear my fandom on my sleeve,
Oh, love
sometimes
it. Love it.
literally,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because that's the kind of stuff that inspired me. Like you can't see here, but right in front of me, like this whole office is completely decked out with stuff that I like, with stuff that I
Hmm.
love,
Hmm.
because that's what inspires me to do what I want. My goal is to always create something that can give people the same feeling that I had when
Hmm.
certain works inspired me. Right. And that's what I meant by that jealousy, right? Like when you engage with something and you're like, oh my God, this is so good. I want to do that. I
Yes.
want to be
Yeah.
able to recreate that feeling with my own work in other
Hmm.
people. Like
Hmm.
that's essentially the grand goal.
Yeah, I love that, and it really connects to things that even I was doing as a young kid, and I see people do, which is you read something or you engage in a world, and you want to keep writing in it, or you want to
Yeah.
keep creating in it. I remember, drawing out the worlds that I really enjoyed, in a notebook, and I still do this. We'll be watching TV, and I'll be, sort of drawing or sketching or writing or something, and it's just a story inspires a story and the stories get passed down and inspire other stories. So I love that creative thread and creative connection.
Yeah, I do think it's all connected. And like I think one of the things that helped me, and this is, personal perspective. I hope this is true to the readers that engage with my work. But I think I kind of leveled up when I stopped thinking about what the reader wants to see or wants to feel, and more about what statements do I want to convey, or
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
statements do I want to cement, because I am very strongly opinionated and not very ashamed of it. You know,
This is good.
um,
This is good. It's good as
yeah,
an author and creator to do that.
yeah, like it's a double-edged sword, right? But I'm also Israeli in nature, so we're very upfront and very direct.
Hmm.
Um, and I realized the best work from, again, my perspective, my best work is when I take one of these statements that I feel very strongly about and just run with it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I use that as an anchor. Like no matter what the characters are, no matter what the worlds are, they always have to serve some strong statement. Like they have to orbit it like a gigantic planet.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it affects everything. It affects characters' mentality. It affects their journey. It affects how your villains behave. It affects what kind of world you build around them. Because I also strongly believe that, and I see this very often with creative process, and all creative processes are valid. But once again, my own opinion is there is a better way to do something. And from my perspective, the world has to serve your statement, not the other way around, right?
Hmm.
You can create the most elaborate world in the world, like that your mind can possibly conjure, and then you're gonna put characters into it in order to, make all of the political intrigue kind of work. In the end, in the end, you might end up with a piece that is very complicated, very widespreading, but it doesn't actually say anything,
Yeah.
right? Or it's
Yeah.
convoluted, or it loses its focus. So no matter what world you had in mind, you shouldn't treat it as your baby. You should absolutely hack at it, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah. Hmm.
mold it to fit what you're trying to say, even if it means completely changing it or picking a different character or completely, like revitalizing what a character is or what it's supposed to do. So that's personal process or philosophy.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I love the process for one thing because it speaks to the fact that not everything comes together immediately.
Yeah,
Um, Things take time and birthing and process, and as you mentioned, hacking away. But then
yeah,
I also love what you're saying about being authentic to what it is you want to say. And I know you want to keep audience in mind in a way, but you also want to make sure that you're not trying to write for everybody because there's no way
exactly.
to please everybody. There's no way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the ideal for me, from everything that I'm working on, my hope is that after reading or watching or playing something that I do, it it shifts how you think about something in your
Hmm.
life. Like it
Hmm.
shapes your reality in some way, or at least makes you pause and go, huh.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I know that for me, the best media I've ever consumed was media that literally made me stop and question something, right? Kind of, it just, I think that's the power in a lot of these things. Aside from entertainment value, it passes the time. Media has the power to actually change minds, to affect how we live our lives, to even
Hmm.
affect our personality in the long run, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that if you have something to say and you think that that's important, you should really harness that. And again, this is like complete personal philosophy. I always tell people, I'm like, hey, if everybody that I ever meet likes me, then I'm being dishonest. Then
Right.
I'm
Right.
lying. There is no way, because my personality is one thing, and the only way that you would have everybody kind of like you is by being dishonest, right?
Right.
Being not true to yourself.
Hmm.
Because we
Hmm.
are different from each other. We don't
Yeah.
agree on everything, right? And
Yeah.
and if you feel strongly about something, you should find ways to convey it.
Yeah. Yeah. And healthy disagreement. I am all
Yeah,
about healthy disagreement.
yeah.
Um, so curious about Eden Frost and sort of the pieces that you would want to share. How does your philosophy come into this work? And then also, what's the collaboration been like? What's the experience of the book been like for you?
Yeah. So that's a multi-layered question. Let me see
It's
how.
a multiple step. So I guess the first part is what are those ideas that you want to bring into Eden Frost that you want to share about right now before it's out?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, I'll kind of give you the brief, let's say, log line or sales pitch of what this title is, and then a
Hmm.
little bit what stands behind it. So, Eden Frost is essentially a historical fiction adventure drama comic series that tells the tale of two young siblings, Alex and Yuli, that use the mystical power of a golem to survive the chaos of the Russian Civil War. Um, and this series is kind of think of it like a complete reimagining of the classical Jewish folk myth of the golem, that creature,
I love it. Love it.
golem
Yeah.
frog. But it was always a sculpted monstrosity that was crafted and brought to life to defend Jews in diaspora against anti-Semitic pogroms. And I decided to create a modernized version of this creature that is very different from any iteration out there. So whatever you're expecting it to be, it's probably not that. And that's all I'm going to say for now.
And it works well. I love that. Yeah.
Hey, this is what I hope, but the readers can decide for themselves. But the idea was to really inject it into a uniquely relevant historical setting. And the reason to do this is to discuss racism, ethnic bias through the lens of anti-Semitism, political philosophy, and the interplay between the two throughout human history. Now, the really weird thing, and in Comic-Con, somebody asked me about this, and I actually dove into it for the first time, I think, in public, what led me to start developing this thing, or this story. And it's a bit dark, right? Because my family history has a lot of darkness in it. My grandparents from both sides are all Holocaust survivors. So you kind of grow up with very specific kinds of stories and with inherited family trauma that some of it we were shielded from, like by our parents, and some of it just carries on. And my last living grandmother, who the character Yuli in the story, she's named after my mom, but her personality is very loosely based on that grandmother. So she survived Auschwitz at the age of 14. And she developed a very strong, very outspoken, very stubborn, just a strong personality out of it. But her view of things was very, very clear. And there are a few things that she said throughout my life, especially throughout my adult life, that really stuck. One of them was that at some point when things got tense, politically in Israel, like she just lamented, and she was always on the left side of everything, but there was this like pain that she constantly felt by the fact that I came here to this country because we finally wanted to have a place that is safe, that I can grow my children in safety. That's for us. And now people want to kill us here as well. And it wasn't because of the politics of it. It was once again this like nugget of anti-Semitism that kept creeping into it, that never went away. And for someone like her who grew up in World War II, who endured the Holocaust, that was absolutely devastating. Now, the moment that I will never forget that made me want to create Edenfrost as a story or as a narrative, this was 2020, like right as like she was like 94 at that point, and she just passed away, right, in 2020. It wasn't COVID related, right? She was very old. She passed away, and about like 2-3 weeks later, I remember turning on the news and all of a sudden seeing just swastikas, Nazi flags on US soil, right? People doing Nazi salutes, yelling like Jews will not replace us. Like, I'm like, oh my God. So you're looking at that, and just the immediate thought that came to my head is what made me pause, because I thought my only like instant thought was, wow, I'm so glad she died before she could see this. And then I had to, like really pull the brakes and go like, oh, holy shit. Like this, why is this the first thing that came to my head? And that got me really, like that kind of triggered this deep dive that I had about, because once again, I take it from a more philosophical or academic point of view and less reactive, because in the end of the day, and it's also, when you read Edenfrost, you will definitely see that it's very focused on telling its story from a secular perspective, which right now I did not predict it being this relevant in so many ways in today's world, because the setting that I chose was not World War II intentionally, right? I chose post World War I, Russian Civil War. One of the reasons is, like a lot of the Jewish genocides, like the pogroms of the time, were kind of almost an inspiration or pilot test that was very heavily studied by the Nazis later. This was a time of chaos, and all the events that happened to Jews in that time period kind of get overshadowed by World War II, which is the, let's call it the cleaner story to tell, which is
Hmm.
like, these are the baddies, these are the goodies, these are all the parties involved, and it was systematic and it was efficient and it was industrialized. Like this was, it's a very clean story to tell. And the Russian Civil War, to me, reminds me a lot of the elements that come out of the hate crimes during that time period. That's what resonates with me more than World War II when I look at the world today. It's a
Hmm.
time of paranoia, uncertainty, division. World War II was a lot cleaner, right? It
Hmm.
was a
Hmm.
refined version. So when I looked at that, I started studying it more deeply and going, "Oh my God, this is fascinating in so many ways." Especially when trying to examine this idea of identity.
Yeah.
And this really goes back to this secular angle, because when I think of like, when I moved to the States, my mom, like I grew up like in a secular home. We're all atheists. Like none of us really do much with tradition or religion in my family. Um, and I definitely was my entire life, and to this day, very much an individualist, right?
Hmm.
My mom was telling me, like, hey, when you move to the States, I know you're not interested in like religion or tradition or any of these things, but wherever you go, people will eventually identify you as Jewish. So at least be a proud one of that.
Hmm.
Now, I don't know what vibe you've gotten from me so far, but I'm a bit arrogant, right? And especially 20-year-old Amit. Oof. Oh man. So,
Everybody in their 20s, right?
oh
Everybody.
yeah. You're this like smug little bastard who's about to like got a big break about to, and I go like, nah. I basically had this mindset of like, no, I will, I am this force of nature. I will basically go and be identified for who I am, not for whatever people want to label me. This is not what defines me, yada yada yada. Um, and I will say in retrospect, and this is what got interesting, I think, like when you look back at when this started in 2020, I wasn't completely wrong, because when I look at my life today, when I look at the people around me, when I look at my friends group, my colleagues, people don't see me and that's what they immediately think. Oh, Amit, the Jew. Regardless of my name, like a lot of
Hmm.
my personality does tend to, and even my look, diffuse that.
Right, right.
However, this is what I missed at the time, and now I see with a lot more clarity. So when you think of anti-Semitism as a force, I started thinking, why is this still sticking? Like
Right.
growing up, I almost thought of it as like, hey, it's really good for like really dark jokes and dark humor because it is so ridiculous. It is so goofy. And then seeing it come back again just shocked me. I'm like, wait a minute,
Hmm. Hmm.
taking all of this seriously? Like, really, you're buying into this? And that kind of, that's maybe my own naivete. It caught me off guard. And it made me realize how malleable that concept is and why it is so effective the deeper that I thought into it. And then I realized another thing, just kind of, I was forced to think about my grandparents. So when I think of that grandmother and my grandfather, they came from Slovakia and from Galicia, from like nowadays Ukraine, and back in the day Poland, before that Austro-Hungary.
Hmm.
But all of them came from Eastern Europe, and especially the Slovak side, like nobody grew up in a shtetl, right? They didn't look religious. They looked like Poles and Slovaks. Like they spoke the language. When you looked at them, you couldn't really identify that that's what they were unless you knew.
Yeah.
And yet,
Yeah.
when their identity was weaponized against them, when the concept of their identity, not really their identity, but when the ideas behind it were weaponized against them, none of it mattered, right? Today,
Hmm.
we're very paranoid. Social media, everybody can find us. They didn't have any of these tools back in the day, and yet they found them. My God, did they find them, right? Tracked every single one.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons it was very effective was because they could pass. And that's, I think, something that we don't talk about very often. It is the fact that you look like your neighbors, that you sound like your neighbors, that it's hard to distinguish. So when people start coming for a certain group, if you're a non-Jew in that time period, you look at them and go, well, they're looking into people's history. I mean, I know I don't have any Jews in my genealogy. Oh my God. but holy shit, they might come for me. So I'm going to
Hmm.
make sure I point at my neighbors and I snitch and you turn paranoid.
Right,
That kind
right.
of logic turns people on each other because you can pass. And that is so malleable and that is so effective. So while I'm using anti Semitism as the vessel, I'm actually talking about the concept of identity and the fact that identity is a construct and it's
Hmm.
a mental construct, it's intellectual, it is flexible, it is fluid, it's ever changing. And when it's weaponized, it can be used to unite, to divide us, or to annihilate us. And I think that goes way beyond the Jewish identity. And that's the real focus of the series. It's not,
Yeah.
it takes the Jewish angle because that's the one that makes sense to me and that I understand. But it
Hmm.
really does talk about this concept of identity and how we perceive it in modern society, and also the dangers of kind of not realizing what it really is.
Yeah.
We always treat it as a monolith.
Yeah. Yeah. I asked a multi-pronged question and what an answer. Yeah, there's so
Sorry.
much. No, no, don't apologize at all. That's a wonderful and multi-layered response. And I'm thinking about how you're talking about uh, identity and how you take it up, how you choose parts of it, how it acts in the world. Then I'm also thinking about how all of this comes to be in a comic story, how you
Yeah.
use the idea of the golem and bringing sort of the fantasy element to comment on all of this too,
Yeah.
and to bring all of these pieces together so that what readers are getting is, something that's highly entertaining, as you mentioned about the things that are around you that inspire you, but also deeply philosophical and thought provoking at the same time. And I just appreciate that so
Thank you.
much. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I hope that comes out. Like, as I said, I'm very opinionated. So, um, but the story itself isn't preachy. And that's where I go back to my influences, right? One of the reasons I wanted to focus on these two kids, these two essentially Ukrainian kids at the time growing up in this time period that lose everything, get thrown out of their homes, is the fact that they actually don't know all this baggage. Because
Hmm.
at the time, this went way beyond just Jewish identity. There was the Jewish identity. There was the nationalistic Russian Empire identity, the communist identity. You're kind of the Ukrainian nationalistic identity. There were so many parties that all had their own view or agenda of how the future should be or who they belong to. And you have
Hmm.
characters, much like the Jews of that time period in that area, that technically didn't belong to any of them, right? And that were to some degree shunned by all of them, or like, so for these kids, they don't know anything going in. So all of this is kind of new to them because as far as they're concerned, hey, we're just, a couple of kids growing up in this area. Sure, we mentally know we're Jewish, but we're not a religious family. It doesn't really affect our lives. These are our neighbors. This is our nation. This is okay. And all of a sudden, they are under attack, getting accused for things that they didn't even realize existed.
Hmm.
So part of the goal of doing this and throwing them into this chaos is also allowing, I don't need the readers to be history buffs. Quite the opposite. You can go in to this title not knowing anything about the
Hmm.
conflict, about its history. In fact, I would prefer that because the reason of choosing kids as your protagonist is because you're going to learn things through their eyes.
Hmm.
When
Hmm.
they see something for the first time, when they learn it for the first time, so will you. And that's how I want to teach people instead of big exposition dumps. And I'm even like people who will read these titles will notice that I'm very cautious never to actually name where we are or when we are,
Hmm.
except through dialogue. Every once in a while, when it becomes relevant, somebody will mention it or hint at it. So you're starting to very slowly put this map together in your head that becomes clearer as time goes by.
Hmm.
And those two characters specifically are also very different in terms of personality. Like I said, I kind of draw from things that I know. So the girl, Yuli, is very much based on my grandma's personality. So very aggressive, stubborn, um, can be very, very warm and loving and loyal, but an individualist, not a trusting person. And Alex is actually, like her older brother, a little more reminiscent of my mom, which
Hmm.
is very empathetic, very diplomatic, very, very smart, but in the end wants to believe that about, like, she wants to believe that there is good in everyone and that everything can be resolved and that you can talk to people, but isn't afraid to fight when things get real, but always puts herself in the way. So these two characters in this conflict actually get drawn apart. They start very, very close, but their ideologies are conflicted because Alex specifically, and once again, when I talk about the characters have to serve your statement, that's what I mean.
Hmm.
So Alex is somebody who's very tribal, and you see that even in his, like, in the first issue, or in the first few issues, he's very tribal. He wants to belong. He wants to get along. He wants to be part of a group or part of something bigger. And Yuli is the opposite. She's someone who doesn't trust anyone, who just believes like it's just the two of us against the world, and we need to take care of ourselves first. She's
Hmm.
very hesitant. She is purely an individualist. And in this time period where loyalties kind of had to be picked for you to survive, that's what starts pulling them apart, right? So, without giving any spoilers away, that's
Yes,
going to
yeah.
be a major element in the story as it moves forward. And it's going to explore a lot of things that I think are very relevant to what we're experiencing in all of Western society today.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to reading more of it. I'm looking forward to sharing about this because I hope people will read it, think about it, both in terms of a story to enjoy, but also a story to sort of make you go, huh, what am I seeing here that's part of this time period that's still part of the human story?
Yeah.
And what do we do about that? And where do we go from here? How do we envision the world differently and in a better way?
Yeah. And and there's other fun stuff in it. I mean, the golem itself, it is a very unique take on this entity, on what it means. It does once again tie to the statement in one way or another with how I treat this creature or entity,
Mhm.
which is an ongoing mystery. So there's a supernatural element and almost like a magic system to it. So I think it's going to be one hell of a journey. I really hope
Yeah.
that people will enjoy it for what it is.
As do I, as do I. Just having seen the sort of the promotional materials, the first issue, and some of those pieces. So glad to share about it. And if I'm a person out there, this will be the last question.
Yes.
Um, if I'm a person out there that wants to go and find it,
Mhm.
when can I do that, and how can I do that?
Okay, so it's coming out November 22nd. We're right now you can already pre-order it from the Mad Cave website.
Mhm.
If you're a legend, you will do that right now. But anyway,
That's right. That's
it's
right.
going to officially come out in both print and digital, right, in November 22nd. So it's going to be in both stores and any online platform that you consume your comics on. In New York Comic Con, I'm going to be there. We just kind of got out of San Diego Comic Con. That was my first appearance after the announcement. But we're
Nice,
also
nice.
going to be, I'm going to be all 4 days in New York Comic Con to do signings, to talk to press, and they will sell early copies with variant covers there as well. So I think that's the first time people will be able to actually get their hands on physical copies. And starting November 22nd, it's going to come out. Um, Next year, I have 3 more original titles unrelated to Edenfrost coming out with
Love
another
it.
creating partner. I cannot talk about those yet, and there's still time. But it's one of them is with Mad Cave, 2 more are with Humanoids Publishing, and it's going to be kind of a wild year for me. I've been working on all of
Wonderful.
these things for the last few years, but now everything is coming out one after the other. So, you know, let's see if people keep with it.
Yeah, yeah, that goes where I was going to go next, which I hope there's more to come.
Mm-hmm.
And looking forward to it, and looking forward to getting to see Eden Frost get out into the world, and then more creating.
Yeah, thank you so much. And basically for anybody who wants to follow my work beyond my comics, like my website amittishler.com is a great place to follow my career in general, even outside of my original projects. But if you want a more personal inside look into everything I'm doing, from exclusive scoops to content to my own perspective on a variety of different topics, I do have a growing community on my monthly newsletter slash creative development blog called Mindsplatter. And you can
Wonderful.
kind of browse through the entire back catalog of issues on amittishler.com slash Mindsplatter, and subscribe if you want to be, want to get your email, your little newsletter dropped automatically on the first of every month to your mailbox. And aside from that, I'm pretty active on social media. So if you want to see a flurry of project updates and my weird media rants, I'm out there. Find me.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'll be sure and share the links. Wishing you a wonderful and productive year with lots of time to rest, reflect, and enjoy some stories from James Tinian and others in between. And yeah, excited to share about your work, and excited that you are creating and sharing out there. So thank you so much,
Thank
Amit.
you so much. I really, really appreciate it, man. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure.
yeah, same here, same here. And I feel cooler for having hung out with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.